Totalitarian World by Bhajanananda. Today I'm going to attempt to make a case for the fact that we may need to unite under a singular totalitarian government in order to progress and survive in this next couple hundred years. So the death of democracy seems like it's coming. Winston Churchill famously said that democracy was the worst of all possible forms of government, aside from all of the other ones. But at this point in our society, democracy, while excellent in respecting individual human rights, creates a stagnation and a situation where oftentimes things cannot get pushed through quickly. In addition, the constant cycles of re-election attract narcissists, and cults of personality form around political figures that are by necessity forced to lie as opposed to actually create good and beneficial changes, because all you can do is attempt to get re-elected, and that attempt to re-elect ends any possibility of change and true difference. While again, democracy has some beauty, it is not equipped to deal with the crises of wars, starvation, economic redistribution that must be attended to. We live in a dying world. If we do not act very quickly, wildfires, droughts, storms, all of these things up on the screen here will be part of us, and the economic issues that we have, they will abound. It would be even more. The refugee crisis will be larger. And as in one of our texts, the burning case for the Green New Deal, it shows that one possible route we could take is the eco-fascist route, in which potentially totalitarian governments form up based on racial exclusion and the destruction of the equatorial regions where people will probably be fleeing for their lives. And if we turn them back and keep them down, it'll be wars for water, wars for resources, intense tribalism continuing on, forevermore. We also live at a specific moment in our life. Carl Sagan said it very well, as a paraphrase. He said, "We have become powerful before we have become wise," and that is apparent on the screen here. We have so much wealth, and yet there are people starving. We have figured out how to obliterate the earth with nuclear devices. We have developed nuclear power, but we don't know how to deal with the waste of it. Wars, people make diseases. Recently, there was a study in Canada in which a group of graduate students decided to create an infectious disease. It took them $500,000 and a graduate level education, and they were able to create a deadly infectious disease that would spread quickly, which means in the future, individuals are going to be able to do immense amounts of damage. And in a capitalist free market society, as beneficial as it may be for individual rights, when an individual has such power over a society, it may be the society's duty to step in and enforce those rights. So this society, my future society, is very Marxist and very authoritarian. The idea stems around the fact that potentially you need a society to come in and be a dictatorship and smooth out these issues that we've had in this last couple hundred years. The legacy of colonialism and neocolonialism, racism, class injustice, etc., and climate change are all things that have to be answered with fierce, radical action that probably cannot be taken in a democratic and free society. So, if we were to do this, this will be immensely powerful government controlling most aspects of life with severely curtailed consumer culture and the like. So the basis of this society is going to be civil service, and everyone has to commit at least 4 years once it gets rolling. Of course, in the beginning, people are going to be drafted from all types, and you can test your way into almost any field. It's a meritocracy, So there's medicine, the military, teachers, builders, government, but everyone is doing this in their late teens, early 20s, working their way towards it. After those years, they get hooked up to either further schooling, internships, or continuation of their career. For example, if you decide to be a government official, you will work as a clerk for the first part, and then you will go into government life. The government life is perpetual civil service, in which you will never really be paid, but you work in the bureaucracy and the continuation of society or whatever. So urban planning is going to be at the center because obviously our population is getting out of hand, and there'd probably be an immense redistribution of population, just randomly, and removal of concrete because environmentally it soaks up so much heat and it causes even more evaporations and various carbon whatever it is. So by planting more trees, we're creating carbon sequestering devices and establishing a society that is more enjoyable to walk on. Because there's numerous studies about how looking at concrete actually increases chances of depression, whereas looking at more green and tree-like things are beautiful. We'll also be where the parking lots once were city gardens and ecological farms. The farming is going to have to switch away from um, soil depleting uh, monocropping and whatnot, and into some more ecological methods in which you use various crops and cycles to promote, soil nutrition. So the peas put nitrogen in the soil, and then you put corn on top of them afterwards, which is damaging to the soil, but then you put peas in again, sort of thing. Um, there's going to be a immense localization of services, so everything should be within walk or biking distance from you, and this is going to include recreational activities because in the society there's going to be undoubtable large amounts of music and arts and whatnot as a kind of means of social distraction, to be honest, because people need to have their purpose. And after you finish your civil service, there's numerous art, ballet, dance, etc. Um, you know, tracks that you can take and then perform for your local community within walking distance. So for ending like food deserts and whatnot, there will always be locations to supply food and the like nearby. Also, of course, a healthcare facility, probably some sort of more mild yet free healthcare, and then you would probably have to take a train to get to the bigger emergency areas. Transportation, how you get around in this newly urbanized society. There's going to be almost a complete removal of cars. There's just too much destruction, and there would not be allowed. Um, Electric cars for emergency vehicles, so ambulances, police forces. If you need to transport someone of importance to somewhere else, we'll have a small stack of electric cars. But extensive bike and footpaths will be like the foundation of how you get around, and trains will allow the redistribution of resources from across the nation and from further trade areas, and also will allow travel between cities. Airships are kind of a far out there idea, but I love them. They're so cool, and I would like to get some back if we could find more helium and not be draining too much of the local resources and whatnot. So mandatory free education that ends with your civil service. You probably follow tracks to get into the civil service. Um, Part of the civil service would be going back and teaching, and then also continuation if people choose to further onto that. It would be in that way. Also, the education is important in that during the civil service you have various classes. So, for example, if you were a police officer, you'd be taking psychology, law, social studies courses, so you could be better at your job. And so most people are in some form of educational class system at some point. There will be a nearly complete destruction of consumer culture, curtailment of money, most likely a removal of meat from the diet, like as Cooper said the other day, like chicken on Sundays, Saturdays. That's probably going to be about it because we can't continue on with this uh, very intense resource consumption that we have going at the moment. Um, Wealth from the previous social classes will have to be redistributed, mostly into government programs, allowing for areas of technological advancement, whether it be space travel to try to go to the moon and get, helium-3, or various things that could better the overall culture, such as guaranteed food, medical care, and shelter for all participants. Um, Energy is vital because this is, in many ways, a challenge to erase the issues of climate change or at least curtail them to some extent. So energy is going to be important, and there will most likely have to be a push in which we use up a lot of resources, probably a lot of fossil fuels in order to create this infrastructure that we're going on to. Probably going to need a lot of metals and a lot of things. And initially, we should go to solar and wind utilized power sources, but also like back to the austerity measures. People are going to be using less electricity. Ideally, you're going to be forcing people to not actually consume as much as they are in this era. I mean, the majority of the world does that anyways, so it's not that unjust. Um, and then I would put massive investment into fusion nuclear power. Again, we do not know if this works yet, but if it does, it's the creation of a star on our very planet using these donut-shaped things over there. And if we can find it, you just need seawater, and you put the seawater in. It's almost environmentally harmless, and it can create almost a limitless amount of energy, theoretically. Currently, everyone created has more energy input than output, so they're actually not working. To implement the implementation of this would probably have to come from some form of revolution. An ideological revolution is ideal, but most likely impossible unless we had something ridiculous happen, like a meteor on the way to hit our planet, at which point we'd all be dead and not have this anyways, or alien invasion, something that's like ridiculous, because you need immense social change for there to be a full ideological shift with this. Um, so more likely it will be done violently, and the issue with that is clear that anytime a society rises from violence, it typically behaves as a violent society. And so this, in a lot of ways, would be the Karl Marx idea of a totalitarian dictator that steers the people towards a better future where we maybe can be free later. But whoever the initial people to take power with would most likely be fairly awful. But they'd also be saving our planet from utter damnation and hopefully abolishing race and class in the midst of that. So there's so many issues with this, obviously. And I'm not saying this is the solution. I'm just saying we have to think of something. I'm just putting something random out there. Undoubtedly, there'll be counter-revolution. People will be coming, and there'll be wars, civil fights. There'll probably have to be killings in the street by the government. It's going to be dark. And one of the great issues of all of the big recent communist revolutions is just the labeling of random people as counter-revolutionaries as the power goes to the head of the people who are in charge. And it's dark very fast. The corruption of officials, kind of linking into the first one, but how can we ensure that our government officials, who we have decided not to pay, and they have to give their lives to the society, but still there's the hubris, there's the pride that could come of it, and what destructions can these people wreak on this society, especially when they have full social control and civil rights have been replaced by like civil duties. It's dark. The black markets and crime. Undoubtedly, if we're banning things like beef and energy and oil, those things will rise up, and there will be crime around that, because anytime there are things that are illegal that are desired, that, yeah, it becomes criminal and creates an underworld, which will probably devalue the society. There's the question of, is this even justice if there's no individual rights? And in a lot of ways, I think it's not. But if we are to survive this incoming century, we might have to turn off our personal and our communal sense of justice and turn it into an environmental and a generational sense of justice. Otherwise, we may find ourselves dead and without anywhere to go, without anything to stand on. If we're punishing counterculture in the society because things like people that will not get behind the energy incentives, or people who just wish to not work or not participate in the social services, how do you punish these people? Do you punish these people? And that becomes a deep question, because once the punishment happens, what makes the counterculture countercultural enough to be punished? Is speaking out against the government punishable? That might be dark. And books, internet, censorship. If this is not a global situation, which is what the outside world, the next one is, you might have to hide the outside world from people. And if it's not the whole world, this whole thing doesn't even work actually. But if there's people resisting to this and living more decadent lifestyles, the people inside would be more likely to rebel. So you might have to hide it. I would like the idea of allowing all books to be read and encouraging discourse, but potentially taking the internet and making it a system where you have to go to internet cafes and whatnot that are controlled by the government, and you're probably watched when you're on there, just as a removal of some of the potentially maleficent ideas. So that was my depiction of a totalitarian culture that I think may be the only way that we can continue into this next century and survive as a race.